Right, so today we're doing Java 1 Lesson 5, and last recording. Um, and we're learning about variables, which is a very important part of Java and any computer science, really. Right, so variables are kind of like storage holders. They can store many different types of values. Generally, though, for the format of it, they consist of a data type, a value, and a name. So they go where printing statements go, which means they go inside the main method, which is the second curly brackets pair. The general creation statement for variables is something like this. So, like I said here, they mainly consist of data types, values, and names. So this is the data type, and you can see that I put an int here. So that represents an integer, if you remember. Um, so they always go in front, the very first one. Then this a here, that's the name of the variable. And again, since it's a name, you can name it whatever you want. Of course, there's naming conventions and also naming limitations, but I believe I'm going to be talking about it later. But generally, though, the limitations are like you can't put numbers right in front. You can put numbers later, but you can't put numbers in front. I don't think you can put any symbols in front. You can put capitals in front if you wanted to, but usually that naming conventions don't want that. So, and also, as a general statement, is that when you're naming variables, it's a good idea to make it meaningful. You can see here that I didn't make it meaningful. Like, why would you name a variable A? You know, um, but that's only because it doesn't mean anything. But later, if you're going to be coding complicated code, it's a good idea to name this something that you're going to know at first glance what it's for. Which means, for example, if you're going to create a counter to count some numbers, right? Then name it counter. Don't name it A, since otherwise you're not going to know what the variable's for. But yeah, a little spiel about that. There's an equal sign, and this is like called an assignment operator. So in this case, you're assigning this variable A to a value. And this value is a 5 here, but again, you can do any value as you want as long as it as long as it matches the data type you put right here. So for example, you can't put 5.0 here. Since that's counted as a double, this is an integer, you can't put it together. It has to be an integer here if you put an int here. And there's a semicolon here, as there is with most Java statements. This is just a general note here. Again, int can be replaced with any other data type, which means you can put it with string, you can do boolean, you can do double, any of those that we already learned. A can also be replaced with any other number, and the 5 is the value of the variable. Right, so another type of initialization, though it's not very commonly used. So the above statement, int a, works just as well as the other type, but this doesn't set a value to the variable, as you can see here. It doesn't have the equal sign. And this could cause other problems down the road. So it is good practice to set a value to the variable each time you create one. So yeah, generally this is for when you use this and when you see other people using it, it's usually because that they don't know, like they don't know they don't have a value to put to this variable yet. So that's why they leave it empty so that you can use it later on and set it to a value. But again, that generally it's not good practice, since like if you're gonna do something like this, usually it would be fine to just set it to 0, for example. But yeah, generally just don't use this. Use the other one unless you have to use this one. Notes about variables, there's a lot, but we'll get through it. So after you create a variable, since it's supposed to be a storage holder, you're not gonna, whenever you use it again, you won't need to write the data type or the value again. So for example, after you write int a equals 5, like the first example I gave you, whenever you use the variable a, you would just write a. And I believe I have some examples of that later. And if not, I can always show you. There's a thing on the JDoodle for that as well, so you can see examples later on. Make sure again to match the data type you put for the variable. Make sure that it matches the value that you want to store in the variable. If you put the wrong data type for a value, then an error will occur. So just something to mention, data types in a variable, they don't ever change. So, but the value can change. And that just means that once you create an integer variable, it can never become a double variable. Like, I mean, there's ways that it can, but generally they don't change. But the value can change. So if you set an int a equals 5, you could always do a equals 7, and then it'll change. Basically, it's easier to change the value than it is to change the data type. But you'll learn about changing data types in a later course. Don't worry about that for now. Naming conventions. So it's recommended that you use lowercase letters for variables names. If you have multiple words, capitalize the first letter of every word after the first word. The words have to all be together, no spacing or symbols other than letters, numbers, and the underscore character. Try to make variable names meaningful yet short. Yeah, so you don't want to write like a gigantic name for a variable. That's kind of weird, and you don't really need to do that. Try to keep it as short as possible, but meaningful. And like I mentioned, you can't put a number at the beginning of the name. Right. So I mentioned about like changing variables after you create it, mainly about changing the value. And what a surprise, I did the same example. So int a equals 5, original one. How you would change it is you would do the variable name equals whatever new value you want. So just notice here that I didn't include the data type again. Since you're using it again, like I mentioned that if you use it after you create it, then you just use the name again. So a assignment operator 7, and this would change the value of the variable a into 7. Yeah, so again, this would change the variable after you create it. Notice how you don't put the data type again. Also, just note how like, so we have this in this order here, int a equals 5 and a equals 7. Always make sure that you're doing it in this order, meaning you create it first and then you do like whatever. Since this is like, it might be really common sense. You might be like, why would somebody not do that? It's like, it goes against common sense, but it's pretty important though. Like, I mean, people usually make this mistake when the code gets like really complicated. So just in general, just make sure you created it first before you use it, since I made that mistake before, and it's like a really like unnecessary mistake, but just make sure you're fixing it and that you know what to do. All right, examples with variables. So if we created int I equals 5 and int j equals 10, so all integer variables, then if we did system.println I plus j, and notice here that we're using the names of the variables, so that's how we use them. I plus j, that would equal 15. And again, note here that I didn't have to write the data type and value again in the print statement. So this generally just makes it easier for people to run stuff without having to type the values over again. Again, just like explaining it more. When it says I, we just replace this I with a 5. So 5 goes here. The j, we replace it with 10, since it's right here. 10 is j, and 10 plus 5 equals 15. So that's why it's 15. Okay. If we did int I equals 0, and then we have a string this time in empty quotes, and we changed the b, the string variable, into hello. So again, this is how you change it. And then we did system.out.println I plus b, you would get 0 hello. So just notice here again that concatenation still works even though like it's variable form now. So it still works as always like the same. You're just doing it with different letters, really. Yeah, so again, notice how I can change the variable after I create it. These are some examples of ways you would use them. These are like more simple simple examples. Operators for variables along the chart again. Okay, so the reason why I didn't go over the operators for lesson 3 when we went over the other operators was because you needed to learn variables before you did that. So anyways, again, most of these should be pretty familiar with you. Besides like the different formatting of it, like the function of it should be pretty familiar with you. So I plus equals 5, that's equivalent to adding 5 to variable I, since there's a plus here. And the equivalent of it is I equals I plus 5. So you can notice here that this is more of a shortcut for operators for variables. So you could do it like this. You could also do it like this. But generally, like this one takes more time to type out usually. And this one's a shortcut. Yeah, so generally this just adds 5 to variable I. And next one, minus equals, that's just basically the same thing, except we're subtracting 5 now. I equals I minus 5. This one multiplies. Should be pretty familiar. I'm not going to go through it too much. I equals I times 5. I divided equals 5, so that divides 5 from variable I. And you can see it here. And note here that if you wanted to like do regular division, you could probably just turn this into double, which means you just add like divide equals 5.0. That would also work. And it'd most likely divide out into regular stuff. It would. Sorry. Anyways, we have the modulus, of course. So we have modulus equals 5. So again, works the same thing as the modulus by itself. Takes the remainder from dividing 5 from variable I. Equivalent here. I plus plus and I minus minus, you can notice are weird ones from before. So this increments variable I by 1. And it always does that. So whenever you use this, it always increments variable I by 1. Same thing here, it decrements variable I by 1. So again, it always minuses 1 from I. And you can see the equivalence here. Yeah, so again, just notice that this 5 can always be changed. So you could change this one into a 6 and it'd just be multiply 6 in variable I. Like the 5's able to be changed. Also, I think it's good to note that usually this only works with integers and number sorts of things. It wouldn't really work with like a string since you can't add it to that. And again, it can't work with the character, that kind of stuff. And we're also just going to be using this a lot in later lessons, so make sure you're good with this. Okay, that lagged for a bit. Okay, example with operators. So if we created an integer a equals 5, and we did a plus equals 5, and then we there's a missing semicolon. There's supposed to be a semicolon here. A minus minus. If we print it out, we're going to get 9. So why, you might ask? A plus equals 5, so 5 plus 5, that equals 10. Then we did an a minus minus here, so again, remember that minus is 1. And that's why we get 9, since 10 minus 1 is 9. Okay, so additional notes about variables. So this is just good to know, but Java generally solves the right side of the variable statement before it assigns the value to the variable. So that's always good to know, since if you like wonder like PEMDAS, make sure to put a semicolon after each initialization statement, not like me. over back there where I missed the semicolon. Before you use a variable, make sure you create it first again. Java won't accept an unidentified variable. Making a variable doesn't print it out. So if you wanted to see what a variable is, you would have to put in a print statement. Also, that's kind of common sense, but it's so important to note out. Anyways, make sure not to have multiple variables with the same name, since kind of forgetting if I ever told you guys, but anyways, Java won't know which variable you're using if you call it. So if you had multiple variables with the same name, like integer A, integer A, integer A, even if there's different values, like Java usually bases it off of what name it is. So if it doesn't know which one you're calling, it can't use anything else to call it. So just make sure you have different names. All right, that is the final lesson of this recording series. And in a second, we'll be doing class problems. So these are the class problems. So again, we kind of just did the parts where we created problems and swapped them. I think we're not going to do this all the time. So maybe next time we'll be doing more of like regular problems that I create, but we'll see. Anyway, so first question was like asking other person to program. And the second one was determine the output. You can read the definitions here. And these are the problems. So I have their names not written fully down, but I'll be doing that later. Otherwise, so these are the problems. Make sure you do them and you understand them. Credit all goes to the people who created these problems. Otherwise, just make sure you understand it. And that would be it for this recording.